From the dawn of time, humanity has pondered many questions. What came first, the chicken or the egg? What happened in the moment before the first moment? And what does happen when you give a massive enemy aloof? All these and more have kept humanity awake at night, wondering about the significance of our place in this vast, unknown universe. But now, these questions, even devoid of answers, may prove powerful tools to defend against the mythos. Hello investigators, welcome to Until the End of Time. My name is Ronica and it is my pleasure and my privilege to preview a card from the upcoming Scarlet Keys expansion. I hope you're as excited for this card as I am, because it is a nifty one. So, I don't think anybody actually noticed this, but in last week's recap video, I actually used this image as my thumbnail, and it is the art for the card that I'm revealing today. And I think it is absolutely gorgeous art, showing a little girl staring up at what looks to be some kind of eye in the sky. And I can tell you right now, this is not actually supposed to be Wendy Adams, which is a thing a lot of people mentioned, but it's actually based on Poppy, which is the main character from Maxine's book Dark Drifters. If you haven't read that book yet, go read it, it's fantastic. But this is the art, I think it is stellar, so let's see how the actual card looks, shall we? Oh dear, that doesn't look legible, does it? Well, something seems to be going wrong here, but I still have my notes, so maybe we can puzzle out what it does together. We already know what the art's supposed to look like, and it says here that the art was by Adam Doyle, who did an amazing job. And I have my tracker spreadsheet, which I've linked in the description below, and it says that this is supposed to be card number 52, so that would make it a seeker card. Let's see if we can add that and see how that looks. Okay, not bad, we've got something here. We can't really play the card like this, but it does look like this card has some kind of skill icons on the left side, so if we can add those, then at the very least we could commit it to a test. Okay, one willpower and one intellect icon. Not bad. I mean, two separate icons usually worse than two icons of the same kind, but seekers do like making willpower tests and intellect tests, so sure, that seems reasonable for a card. If we can't play this, at least we can commit it. I've also found some of my old teasers over in the Mythosbuster server, and it looks like I teased what traits this card had, so fortunately we can add those right now. And they are the Insight and Paradox traits. Neat. So Paradox is probably one of my favorite traits because it's just like so wild and so interesting. And there's only 4 cards with Paradox, counting this one, of which 2 are Mystic cards, sorry. 1 is Survivor, and then this is the first Seeker Paradox card. Insight, of course, is a bit more well-known, and there's a bunch of things that react with that. Notably, Joe's Hunch deck, of course, consists out of Insight cards. So this being an Insight, pretty interesting, but, you know, we're going to have to see what this card actually does before we can get anywhere. Okay, so I've been doing some number crunching, and I feel pretty confident in saying that this is supposed to be a level 1 event that costs 1 resource. So every main class seeker, I mean, depending on whether you count Norman as a main class seeker or not, can take this card. And everybody who has 0 to 2 access seeker also can take this card. Roland, Trish, and only costs 1 resource. So that's pretty cheap. I like it. But we need a name to talk about this card, right? The card is nothing without its name. So let's give it a name. I mean, we don't have one here, so let's just call it some kind of paradox. It's all about puzzles. What if we call it Existential Riddle? That looks pretty good. That's a good name, Existential Riddle. I like that. Of course, that's a bit useless if we don't know what the card actually does. But fortunately, I have somebody on the inside who's working with me, which is Discord user Pauli, who's been working on machine learning to try to figure out what these cards do. There's a thread over in the Mythosbusters. If you're interested, go have a look. And I asked Pauli to help me with this, and so I've given him all of this, and hopefully this all works. We can get the card text from him. Wow, it's a great job. Looks really good. So it's a parlay. You choose a non-elite enemy at your location, and you test Willpower Intellect 8. And then if you succeed, you automatically evade the chosen enemy, and you attach Existential Riddle to it. The attached enemy then gains aloof. That's pretty great. I mean, it depends a little bit on what kind of enemies we're facing, but obviously Seekers historically haven't had the best answers against big enemies especially. Like, they can usually deal with the smaller ones reasonably well, but especially in solo, if you get a big enemy, that's pretty awful. And so I went and looked at some of the enemies that have caused me the most grief over the years. Conglomeration of Spheres, 6 health, 4 evade, has Hunter, and it eats all your melee weapons. Just give it aloof, and then, I don't know, don't worry about it. The Deep One Bull, he doesn't have Hunter, but it's gonna chase you down, and if it catches up, it's gonna cost you more cards from hand. If you give it aloof, it never actually catches you. It just keeps following you around, but it can't actually grab you, even if you start killing all of the other deep ones. But unfortunately, there are some enemies where this card doesn't work nearly as well. It doesn't get rid of the enemy in any way, so if that enemy has Doom on it, maybe don't bother with this particular riddle. You're gonna need some other tool to get rid of the Acolytes. It also obviously doesn't work on elite enemies, but, you know, it's still pretty great for all the non-elite enemies out there, which is the majority. So yeah, there you have it, Existential Riddle. That seems like a great card. It's pretty fun. The difficulty 8 test is kind of like, it's kind of tricky though. Hold on. Seems like there's this weird empty blank space. I'm gonna give this machine learning algorithm another go and see if it can find something to put in that spot. Give me a second. Oh, there we go. That seems a lot better. So the test on Existential Riddle gets -1 difficulty for every other card in our hand. That's great. So, yeah, now we're talking. Okay, so obviously, if we have, you know, no cards in hand, it's difficulty 8, which seems pretty hard to pass. But, you know, your Seeker, you have a lot of draw. Presumably you're gonna have, say, 5 cards in hand, in which case it's a difficulty 3 test. Difficulty 3, willpower, intellect, whatever you can boost higher, seems perfectly functional. But keep in mind, if you can get 8 cards in hand, and Seeker have some ways of boosting their hand size as well as drawing more cards with Laboratory Assistant or Dream Enhancing Serum, you can have a difficulty 0 test. And the nice thing about difficulty 0 test, which I assume most of you are familiar with, but just in case you don't know, you're always going to pass those unless you draw an autofill or similar you automatically fill effect, because investigators always win dice, and if your skill value would be reduced to a negative, it is instead reduced to 0. So difficulty 0, skill value of 0, you pass that test. So Existential Riddle opens up a potential enemy management solution that has a fairly reliable skill test on it, especially if you can keep that big hand going. And so it seems like a great solo card. 2 investigators that I particularly want to give a shout out to are Trish Scarborough and Harvey Walters. Trish really likes this card for having an enemy around that she doesn't kill, but doesn't really get to hurt you either because it's aloof. And so you can use her ability to get additional clues very easily. Harvey, on the other hand, doesn't really care much about that part, but he's got 1 combat and 2 agility, so that's not the most reliable. But he's usually going to have a lot of cards in hand, especially with his signature, giving him a bigger hand size. Getting to 8 cards for Harvey is no problem at all, and he's got that 4 willpower, 5 intellect. He's not going to have any problems passing this test. And then it is a very good way for Harvey to deal with an annoying enemy by just aloofing it. Now, I did quickly mention what would happen if you give a massive enemy aloof at the start of the video, and I do want to answer that one, because fortunately, while that might be a bit of a riddle, we can solve that. I have asked Maxine, lead designer for this game, what would happen, and she came back to me and answered, so what happens is that if a massive enemy also has aloof, as long as it is ready, it is engaged with all enemies, or all investigators at its location, just like massive normally works, which in essence just negates aloof. It basically works the same as if it didn't have aloof. However, if it is exhausted, it is considered to be engaged with no investigators, and because it is massive, you cannot take the engage action to engage it, and because it is aloof, you cannot attack it. So there's not a lot of massive enemies that aren't also elite, but there's a couple, and generally speaking, I would avoid using this card on them because you're basically making it impossible for you to attack them profitably, and it's just kind of tricky. But I've played plenty of games at Arkham where we had to do something that we weren't happy with, but it just had to happen. But I wanted to make sure you all knew how those rules were supposed to interact, because it's a bit of a tricky one, and as far as I'm aware, it's the first time that this particular interaction has ever been possible. So I'm glad to have been able to answer that rules question in the video while I'm announcing this card. And that's it. That's Existential Riddle. I'm very happy with this card. Thank you so much to FFG for allowing me to preview this. Thank you for watching. Thank you to everybody in the Mythosbusters Discord who has been playing along with all my guessing games. I made this video to try and kind of harken back to that puzzling nature, because they've been looking at this card or parts of it for weeks now, and I've been driving them up the wall. But fortunately, we finally figured it out, and thank you for watching. I'll be seeing you until the end of time.